Welcome to Hispanic Biz Success Stories. We have the pleasure of discussing with successful entrepreneurs their story. We learn from them how they built a business and how in the world did they achieve success in their business. Today our special guest, you'll enjoy, is a gentleman, Gustavo Farell, the president of Cesar-Scott. Thank you, Mr. Farell, for being with us.
Thank you for having me here.
Appreciate that. So what is Cesar-Scott, Inc.?
Cesar-Scott is a manufacturer of wire harnesses and distributor of cable management products. We've been in business for over 30 years now, established in 1988 back in Minneapolis, Minnesota, and have been working here on the border really since the mid-90s with our manufacturing operation in Ciudad Juarez, Mexico.
So this is a business you started in manufacturing.
That's correct, yeah. I started it with my partner. I'm actually the owner and co-founder. My partner is Scott, a fraternity brother back from University of Minnesota. I am Cesar Gustavo Farell, and he was the one that had the idea to start the business.
And you both went to school in Minnesota?
Yes, yeah. We both went to the University of Minnesota. He was a year behind me, and he was a very charismatic salesperson who always wanted to do more with his life. And I was your typical engineer, always working diligently, working hard. I was employed by Honeywell up in the Twin Cities area. Very happy with what I was doing as a process and eventually a project engineer.
So how many employees do you have?
Here in El Paso, which is our corporate headquarters, we have 20 employees, some part-time, and in Ciudad Juarez we have, that varies depending on the demand, approximately 70.
And your office is on Myrtle Street?
Yes, pleased that we kept our offices here in El Paso. It's down on Myrtle Street. Actually, we are on Williams between Myrtle and Texas. Very happy to be in the old industrial district where they used to manufacture jeans.
Yeah. So let me ask you about your family background. Where is your family from?
My family, as myself, I was born in Montevideo, Uruguay, and my father as well was born there. My mother was born in Madrid, España, and they met in Uruguay. My grandfather on my mother's side was in the Navy and did quite a bit of traveling, the Uruguayan Navy. And they met down in Uruguay, and my older sister, and I were both born in Montevideo.
And when did you come over to the U.S.?
As I like to say, I didn't come over, they brought me over. I was only 2 years old, and thanks to my mother, we came in 1963. My mother insisted we continue to speak the Spanish language, so she wanted us to have that with us, and that is really one of the reasons why I ended up in El Paso, because I was a Spanish-speaking mechanical engineer.
Wow, interesting. And so how in the world did you keep your language?
It wasn't easy. As I was telling you a little bit earlier, we had Spanish classes after our regular schooling at the Iowa City, Iowa, where I grew up, and in grade school, and we'd come home, and my mother would have us not only have the spoken Spanish that we would speak at home. Typically they would speak in Spanish and we would respond in English, like is very common here. But we did continue to learn the grammar, and to this date, especially after having been here so many years, I can say my grammar is very, very good, spoken and written.
Yeah, I grew up in a Spanish-speaking home, speaking English, and of course my grammar isn't very good, even though I've been here on the border all my life. But so why Iowa? Why did your father decide to go to Iowa?
In Uruguay, the schooling there is free, or it's not, you don't pay for that. So only the best get to be in the university system there. He was at the top of his class, the brightest in his class, and he obtained a scholarship to come to either the University of Iowa or I should say MIT in Boston back in 1963. And it was an opportunity for them. They wanted to come and see what it was like in the United States to get an education here, with every intention to go back to Uruguay after they had completed their education here, namely his master's and PhD. They chose the University of Iowa because it was a smaller town. It was a better town to raise children, and even though one could say that MIT was probably have more notoriety as an engineering school than what University of Iowa did, he did select University of Iowa.
And what was his career field?
He was in civil and mineral engineering is what he taught when he was in the Midwest, but his degree was in hydraulic engineering.
Okay. So he became a professor?
He's a professor, and his expertise, actually he's one of the foremost experts in what are wind tunnels. And
oh, wow, okay.
he actually designed and developed the wind tunnel for the University of Minnesota, where we eventually ended up. And he has published a lot and done a lot of work in that field.
Okay. And your mother, what did your mother do?
My mother was a stay-at-home mom early on, but she also was degreed, educated, business, and she used to work in a bank in Uruguay. And then when she came to the U.S., she wasn't able to work until the paperwork was allowing her to do that, and she eventually got her degree here in business in the University of Iowa, and she taught Spanish.
Ah,
so she ended up teaching Spanish in high school, which is something she had a passion for.
So you graduated high school in Iowa?
I did. I graduated Iowa City, Iowa, 1979. We're going on our 40th this year. August is our high school reunion, hoping that I can make it.
And so then what did you do?
Well, my folks, trying to keep our family together, they always were looking out for the best of their kids, like most parents do. And my father sought a transfer to the University of Minnesota to see if he could continue to keep us together, knowing very well that my older sister and I, once we graduated with our degrees, we were more than likely going to have to leave Iowa because there was not the opportunity for work that a larger city could offer. And actually he had a couple choices. One was go to the University of Atlanta or Minneapolis. We were already used to the cold in Iowa, so we just went a bit further north, and very happy that we did. Minneapolis is a beautiful, beautiful city.
What was it like growing up in Iowa as a Hispanic?
You know, I was too young to know that. I just know that it was kind of different, because when I would tell people my name, Gustavo, they would not get it. And back then, you have to understand, not that many Spanish-speaking people were in Iowa. Mm-hmm. So I ended up being called Gus, which was fine, and that seemed to be what all the teachers and everyone would prefer to call me. So I adjusted quickly, and I felt good about being able to speak a language that other students couldn't, and thanks to, again, to my parents and our background.
So you go to Minnesota, University of Minnesota, and you study, what is your field?
I went to the University of Minnesota, Minneapolis, and I studied mechanical engineering. I always knew, like many kids nowadays, I have no idea what they want to be, and I can say that for my kids, but they're working on it. But I knew I wanted to be an engineer, and I had tried doing some doctor-type training in that, and I didn't like blood, so I said, that's not for me. So my sister went that route, and I went the engineering route. And I had the opportunity to work with Honeywell as a student while I was a student there, and I continued on my career. I love to build things, put things together, and I'm very hands-on.
And your sister went on to medical school?
She went on to medical school in internal medicine, and she's been a physician since in her own business.
And then your younger sister?
My younger sister, who was born in Iowa City, Iowa, she's 7 years younger than us, 9 years younger than my sister, I should say. She is currently living in California, and she's also in business for herself. And she is she went to University of Minnesota, graduated from the school there in business as well, and now she has an import business for bringing mate, yerba mate, from Uruguay.
Wow, interesting.
So we're all independent business people.
So was that something that you talked about at the dinner table, about being independent business people? Or?
I was the first one to do it, and that was in 1988 when I started the business. And as I said, I really didn't want to start the business, but some things led to the opportunity to do it, so I did. But Yes, they were, because I can say my father and my mother, being very scared of doing something on your own like this, they would have never done this. My father loved to, and he's still with us today, and he loves to live vicariously through all of the risk-taking and all of the things that I have been known to do over the many years, but he wouldn't do it himself.
Well, he's an academic,
That's right.
and that he likes to know what he's doing and know what he's talking about, I guess. What's he like? What is your father like?
My father is very Latin, and after being here for 45 plus years, he still remains very Latin in his ways. He would prefer to speak Spanish, even though he speaks perfect English, writes perfect English, writes Spanish. But he does really maintain a lot of the culture and the ways that he was brought up with when he was growing up. Of course, they left Uruguay when they were 28 years old.
Oh. And your mom, what was she like?
My mom was always and she passed back in November of 2016. We do miss her a lot. She taught us how to always give and take. She was always siding with the person that wasn't there. She always spoke well of the person that couldn't defend themselves. She would give everything of herself, never expected anything back. She was quite the lady.
Did she have sayings that you still live by?
No, but I always remember a lot of the sayings that she would tell my dad, which was, "Ay, Cesar," and that was kind of like, enough. You've said enough. I don't want to hear any more. She, like most mothers, she ruled the household, and I liked the way she would always put a stop to it when he would get carried away with some of his things that he would do. That at one point she said, "That's enough." So, saying-wise, again, not really any sayings that I would say are familiar here. There was a lot of things that are I can go back and talk on, but specific sayings, not really, no.
So if somebody was to walk in your home in Iowa, would they know it was a Latino home?
Very much so, yeah. My father, and I love him to death, but he would make someone uncomfortable right off the bat. And that was just the way he was. And he didn't do it intentionally, but it was always I don't know, he'd feel a little bit defensive. I don't know if he would feel defensive or he wasn't unsure, but it was just kind of a feeling of, people that would come over, there was almost like a little bit of a standoffish until he would open up, and then he was fine, and they'd get to know him. But he was always a little bit, standoffish at first.
So, so you finished college, and you're working with. You had an internship with Honeywell, you said.
Honeywell, that's correct.
And how long did you work with them?
Honeywell, I worked actually for a total of 7 years, plus the 2 when I was an intern with them. They treated me very well. Excellent company, a company that I would quickly go back to if I had the opportunity. Their corporate headquarters was in Minneapolis, Minnesota at the time, so they had literally thousands and thousands of jobs there, people working for Honeywell and spouses related to the people that were there. But I enjoyed working for them. I learned everything I know in terms of working for a big company from them, and I have no regrets that I left or that I was there when I was with Honeywell. I did find that the main reason why I eventually left Honeywell was because my partner Scott, who had said, "Have you ever wanted to do more, make more, do other things?" And quite honestly, I said, "No, not really, but I'm happy. I'm getting paid well for what I do. I travel, I enjoy, I have the pressure that most people have with their day-to-day jobs." But then this word called politics came into play, and that was something that kind of set me off a little bit in terms of, one thinks that I could be the CEO of Honeywell in someday, and which is what I wanted to do, and it wasn't such an easy, work hard, do everything right, and move on up the chain. And that, of course, as a young engineer, you don't realize that that's not how life works. Now we do. So that was something that kind of got me thinking about other things or possibly doing something different.
So you already had that churning inside of you.
I did. And the other part of it was that every time myself as an engineer would go and do what we call a return on investment analysis in terms of seeing whether or not we should build something in-house or outsource it or different, every time we would justify buying some equipment and bringing it in, they would apply what they call their overhead rates to the product or process that we were working on. And that would just literally shoot the cost of the product so high that we couldn't justify making it in-house. And that got me thinking on, well, if I was to do this outside and not have these overhead rates, then we could be a good, or someone else could be a good supplier for this product to Honeywell. And that's how I learned about some of these overhead rates and how structures of companies work, especially large companies.
So how long did you stay with them?
Well, Honeywell was 7 years, but the first couple years I was in a military division group, Undersea Systems Division. Very interesting. We were actually building components for some of the missile product back then. Right. And then after that I sought a transfer to a group that was making the test sets for the F-15 fighters. And that's where I learned everything about printed circuit board assembly, about cable assembly, about electromechanical assembly, chassis assembly. And I was exposed to training people and learning myself how to make all these components that go into these test sets. And that was a wonderful experience because it was very hands-on. And that was my first exposure to working in Mexico, because this product that we were working on was being built in the city of Chihuahua, Mexico.
So did you go to Chihuahua?
I did. I was going to Chihuahua every month, about 10 days a month, and it seemed like a long time, but it really was only for a couple years. Being that it was a military program, the project started and ended due to funding cutbacks within a couple years. But I had been exposed enough to what was manufacturing in Mexico that I liked it. And I decided to seek a transfer to work with Honeywell on the border. And I had the opportunity to go to San Diego or to work in El Paso. What was interesting about the offer that I received was it was the same amount of pay in either city. And I already had in mind to start my own business, and I guess the decision, because the border was much closer here and the cost of living much less in El Paso, I chose to come here.
Did you already have a family? You have 2 children?
No, actually no. I did not have a family at the time I came down here. I didn't have a family. I met my ex-wife then, and a couple years later we started going out. She's actually an engineer, very capable engineer, and we ended up having a couple kids, and she continued on her path working with some of the maquilas, and she's actually still here in the area and working for one of the larger.
How old are your children now?
My son is 22, and my daughter just turned 20. My son is in, he's just, I don't know the acronyms exactly, but basically he's in Ranger School. He just got accepted. He's in San Antonio, and his graduation from the Combat Medic Basic Training is here in July. So we're excited for him, also very worried for him, but I think that it's a wonderful opportunity for him, and he's a very, very giving young man. My daughter, who has been studying in the American University in Paris, she just got back, and she is looking to go back there. She really loves the traveling and the European culture, so hopefully she'll be going back in September to continue her education there.
Wow, fascinating. So you come here and working for Honeywell, and you see this opportunity. You had an urge to do something on your own. So how did that begin to materialize?
I always knew I could make anything. which is typical of any engineer. I think the biggest fear that any person has, that I would have to say any normal person has, is selling. And I think that has to do with believing in oneself, able to convince someone else that what you have or what you're doing can be a benefit to them. And I was very typical. I could put anything together. That was the whole idea of the Scott, of Cesar-Scott, was he was supposed to learn and be able to sell the products that we were going to come up with and build here on the border. What he did not realize was that he was probably going to have to learn more about engineering and actually being here more often than not to understand what we were doing. And as it always turns out, I think that the best person to sell whatever you may be doing is the person that knows the most about it. And in the end, it was me. So I had to pick up the selling skills versus him picking up the product knowledge skills. We worked out a very nice amicable breakup. We're best of friends, and just realized that he continues on with his career up in the Minneapolis area, and I continued on down here, going from being the manufacturing person to being the selling person, which then allowed me to meet who is now Francisco Armendariz, who is my manufacturing person in Juarez. And we have a wonderful relationship, a handshake relationship of 30 plus years that it's pretty incredible. We have our battles, like any business people do, but we've been going at it for 30 years, and he runs the operation in Mexico. And of course, we run all what takes place in El Paso. And
so what was your first product?
the first product, it might be difficult for, what we actually do is called contract assembly for wire harness. And our first product was a product called heat shrink tubing. And it is used in all types of electrical applications. You'll find it at Home Depot. You'll find it just about anywhere at any distributor, Fastenal. They all carry this. But what we were doing was we were putting custom marking on it, which made it specific to customers' needs. It can be used in forklifts, can be used in military type applications. All kinds of applications, heat shrink tubing, and all types of heat shrink tubing can be used throughout industry.
So who was your first customer?
First customer, and I am very pleased to say we still have them, and a company in Houston, Texas called Mitsubishi Caterpillar Forklift.
Okay.
And they are our longest running customer. I can't remember the exact date that we got them, but I do have in my office a picture of the first check we got from them back in the early 90s. And we continue to do business with them. Although they're a very good customer, they continue to only work with them in the area of heat shrink tubing.
So how did you fund the startup?
When I was 26 years old, when I was thinking about, when I finally went on my own a couple years after, I worked with some engineers who ironically are my age now, and the only thing they would say to me, they'd say, "Hey Gus, if I were you, I would put money away in a 401k, I would not spend all your money on an expensive car, I would, save some money, enjoy yourself, but you're gonna, 30 years from now, you're gonna be saying to yourself, why didn't I do that?" And I listen to everyone. I digest, and then I take from that what I think is the best way to proceed, and obviously that did pay off for me. I had put away enough money, I thought, that would last me for a couple of years. And it turns out that it wasn't even enough to last me 1 year. And that's something I can tell anybody that wants to be or thinking about being an entrepreneur is if you think it's going to cost you or you're going to need $1, you better multiply that by 3. And if you think it's going to take you 1 year, you'd better multiply that by 3. It's just one of those things that things happen. So I had put that money away, and I knew that if I didn't do anything, I had 1 year. And I think one of the other things that I would tell young aspiring entrepreneurs is do it when you're young, because if you're not successful or you choose to go back or do something else, you still have the ability to learn and change and adapt because of your young age. And that's what I did.
So how old were you when you committed to begin your own business?
When I committed, it was 1988, so 27 years old, which when I look back is pretty young when I think about, my kids are very close to that.
But in the process from graduating from college, you were preparing for this, maybe indirectly or?
Honestly, I really was not preparing for it. I knew that I could learn and make anything that was put in front of me, but in terms of doing it for myself, I thought I would continue to do it for others. And again, that fear of going off and doing something on your own was always inherent in your engineering background. But things change, as they did with me, and between the understanding how cost structures were at the corporate level and the politics that played out, I said, now's the time. And that's what I did.
No going back.
Well, early on, I always had that I could go back. I could go possibly, get back to work, even for Honeywell, for that matter. I'm sure they would have taken me back and with more experience in that. But there was a point, I would say, and that wasn't too long ago. I would say, too long ago. It was early 2000s that I said, that's it. There's absolutely no going back now. We're in this too deep, and there's no reason to go back. Now we have to find avenues, find channels, find opportunities, and continue to grow the business, which is what we've done.
We're very fortunate today to have with us Mr. Gustavo Farell, who is the CEO, president of Cesar-Scott Manufacturing. As you were sharing with us, Cesar-Scott is a manufacturing operation, and primarily you manufacture components?
We manufacture wire harnesses, and we distribute cable management products for different industries, appliance, automotive. We don't do any safety-related products for automotive. A lot of industrial products. So we manufacture a lot of the custom wiring that's designed by our customers that would be found in the marketplace, like your Whirlpools, your Maytags, your.
So what are wire harnesses?
Wiring harnesses are a configuration of wires that are with specific breakouts, lengths, terminations that fit a product and will only fit a certain product. And the harnesses, many of us know that from horse racing, essentially the same, but this is with wires.
So an electronic component in a washer, dryer, automobile, those are the connections that you're making.
They're the connections that would connect your brains of a vehicle with the turn signal, for example, with the speaker system, which we do a lot of wiring for an automotive customer here doing speaker systems in Ciudad Juarez, Mexico. So anything that is needed to connect, we do a lot in the gas stove industry, something where we have started to do some of our own product development. Mainly because one of our customers decided to get out of the business, turning over their manufacturing to us, and also stating that if we wanted to continue to service and sell products to them through their distribution channels, we would have to be creative and come out with some more products because their products were becoming obsolete.
Wow. So you started in 1988?
Correct.
Here in El Paso, Juarez.
I came to El Paso, Juarez in 1989, February of '89, and in 1990 we set up a shelter operation across the border, and I met my manufacturing partner down there, which is Francisco Armendariz, and we have been actually building wire harnesses since about 1994.
So was Juarez already building wire harnesses?
Yes. Yes, Juarez and actually the state of Chihuahua is what many people call the wire harness capital of the world. There are more wire harnesses and wiring that comes through this state than any place else in the world that I'm aware of. Manufacturers such as Delphi, now Aptiv, Lear, ECI, Yazaki, and the list goes on, Sumitomo, all of those making wire harnesses for themselves or for others.
So you've been part of the growth of that industry here in this border community.
I have. In fact, I'm very pleased that I'm part of the association, which is the Wire Harness Manufacturer Association, which is in an association that represents about 200 manufacturing members, of which we're one, and we have about 40 or 50 supplier members that are part of this. And these would be equipment suppliers, material suppliers, they may be distribution companies, even service companies for the wire harness industry. And we started getting involved with the Wire Harness Manufacturers Association about 10 years ago now, and I'm on the board. I'm actually in charge of marketing for the association, which recently became part of IPC, which IPC is what is known as a educator, puts out standards for workmanship and for other industries, including the printed circuit board industry. And our standard, which is the IPC WAMA, which is the standard we contributed to it, is called the IPC WAMA A620. It's the standard that governs how you build wire harnesses. And many a time a customer will dictate to you how you build a harness, but mostly customers don't know. So the IPC becomes the third-party document which says, this is what a good crimp looks like. This is what a good solder joint looks like. All the things that you can have disagreements with your customers, which could end up costing more if you don't have a unifying document which allows you to say that this is right or this is wrong.
So as part of that national association and the presence here on the border, you're putting together a big conference coming up. What is that?
We are, and for many of you that have been in the industry and in the area for a long time, there was a show here called the Borderland Trade Show. Back in the 90s, in its greatness, it was a great show. It was in El Paso, Texas, the convention center. And when I started to attend it as a visitor, I noticed that all the wire harness equipment suppliers were there. So it evolved to become a show for the wire harness industry, which made sense because of the number of wire harnesses we have being built in Chihuahua. For various reasons, 2001, what happened then, 9/11, and other factors, that show disbanded, and it moved to Milwaukee, and that show now is called the Electrical Wire Processing Show in Milwaukee. It takes place in May. That's been going on for 19 years, and I've always known that that show really belonged down here because that's where most of the equipment and all the materials are going because of the labor intensity that we have in the making of wire harnesses. That is the main reason why they're made in Mexico, is because you can't take the labor out of making that in a low-cost country, and that's the only way that we can compete successfully against China or other countries. So Mexico has been able to offer that. It's been good for both countries, and but I can say this, if the labor weren't necessary in what we did, we would be making it right here in the United States with equipment or automation.
So why the show?
Well, the show, I just knew it made sense that it should be down here. The only thing I saw different was that show belonged across the border. And the reason is there's many, many engineers that are wanting to look at equipment, technology, what I did when I was a young engineer, that their companies, much like mine, cannot afford to send them to a Milwaukee to go up and visit and learn about the equipment. It's too expensive. They may have visa issues. Time, takes time to do that. So by bringing the show down to the Juarez area, it makes it accessible not only for the equipment manufacturers who come from throughout the world, the United States, Germany, Japan, China, Taiwan, many locations. Canada, the engineers who typically are the ones that will specify the equipment, either the engineers, the supervisors, the maintenance managers, they want to know what's going into their plants to produce the products that have to come out. They do not want a corporate person telling them what kind of equipment to buy. And the main reason is that if they have to maintain that equipment and you have different machines, it gets very expensive to be maintaining different types of equipment that might give you the same result. So that was one of the big reasons why I knew it was smart to have it here, because you could bring up more of the decision-making personnel, those that actually determine what equipment is going to be used. Easier to get them to Juarez than to bring them to Milwaukee.
Okay. So when does that take place?
That'll be October 24th through the 27th of this 2019. It'll be in conjunction with a show that is being done by El Ingeniero Héctor Núñez, Expo MRO, in its 9th year. Very successful show, which really deals with a lot of the MRO suppliers in Mexico.
What is MRO?
MRO is those items which are not direct purchases, in other words, not used in the products. It could be anywhere from packaging, it could be miscellaneous items, kitchen, anything that is used in the manufacturing facilities that isn't directly related to the product itself.
Like packaging and stuff.
Yeah, yeah.
So did you, when you began your business, did you foresee that you would be involved in the National Association, that you would have a mature manufacturing operation when you began?
No, and I can say this, 10 years ago, and my and I want to mention her name, is Ingrid Flores, who has been with me 20 years now. She is my marketing manager and attends all these events with me, and she currently is working for me and works out of Austin, Texas, comes here regularly. We travel a lot together. She's always been there with me, always at my side. When we started going to these events, the WAMA, the Wire Harness Manufacturer Association events, we started making contacts that were invaluable. In fact, I very surprisingly enough, without mentioning names, many of the businesses that are there that are competitors of ours, we're actually doing business for them. So you may have competitors, but you should never really look too far away from them, because you may be able to help them or they may be able to help you. And that's really what transpired, and the numbers of people and the networking that we've accomplished over the years, thanks to the association and the people we've met there, has been phenomenal.
So you start manufacturing, and you start in Juarez, but you had your headquarters here. So you're an engineer, you know how to build things, but you have to deal with people. All of a sudden now you have employees. What was that like?
Well, I as the CEO of my company, and I've done a lot of reading and of course have a lot of experience dealing with people. I feel like at times I should be more communicative, and that's been brought to my attention. And I think we could all be more communicative. But as most engineers are more quiet in that, but slowly I've outgrown that. But as the CEO, I think the most important thing for me to communicate to my employees is our vision, what we want to be as a company. And I think I've done a very good job of telling them, the direction we're going, and that can change over time, and it has. Now we're developing products for industry which contain wire harnesses in them through our gas ignition module products. Very interesting, and I'd be happy to share more on that. The other thing I need to do is worry about cash, which is the hardest thing for any small business, actually any business, is make sure that the cash is there to sustain the operation, because there's a simple concept that you can actually grow yourself into bankruptcy, and you have to be very careful with that, because you may have a great number of receivables and you may have a great number of payables, but that does not translate to cash until it's cash. So don't forget that cash is cash. And third is the people. I surround myself with very, very good people. My employees, they've been with me a long time. I can say I don't think they're overpaid, but I think they're treated and very well. And they like working for me and the environment that we work in. Yes, some days are challenging. Everybody has challenging days. Not everybody wants to go to work and be gung-ho every day. Things happen at home. Things happen that can change that. But the employees themselves are key to the success of any business. And I think the way I've treated the people has made it easy for me to have these employees, and they've been with me a long time. As well, the CEO should be very, very attuned to suppliers and customers, because your employees really are your internal customers that you have to deal with them day in and day out. But you have your external customers, which without them we have nothing. And I tell them, customer is everything. Customer is king. Customer, what they say may not be what you want to hear, but they're right. And that's the way you have to operate. The only thing I won't allow a customer to do, and I have stepped up to them because I knew them, is to say bad things about employees that are not work-related items. So I will defend my employees, and I think that's very important that any boss should do that. Right. I don't care if they're the customer. I won't accept that. I don't want them as a customer if they're going to treat them in that kind of fashion.
Very good, very good.
Vendors, on the other side, without them we have nothing, because we can't satisfy the needs of our internal customers nor our external customers without our vendors. So I believe our vendors like working with Cesar-Scott. Of course, very importantly, we pay them. That's first and foremost, and we pay them when we say we're going to pay them, and that is critical to continuing that relationship. But I do believe that even with our small to medium size, our vendors have enjoyed working with us because we treat them fairly.
So I have a couple of questions about, one question has to do with capital, access to capital. But the other question I want to ask you is about, because you're here on the border and you're in I don't know all the manufacturing, but being a Latino, owning a manufacturing operation from El Paso, what difference has that made?
As far as
has it been problematic, or is it an asset?
I don't think it has been one way or the other. I really think that banks want to lend money, and I'll be quite frank here, to people that have money, and basically saying that we'll lend you if you have the money to support what we're lending you. I don't think that's to any surprise, be a collateral or you name it. But that's who they're going to lend money to. And I always come back and say, well, who's the customer, the bank or the customer? And I don't want to talk poorly about banks, but they all follow that same line. They have to protect themselves, and they do. There's other means of obtaining capital. And I have, if you will, an angel that has graced me and has been good for her too, that my sister has supported us for many years now, and thanks to her success in her business, she has reached out and kept us going and giving us the capital that we've needed to grow the operation. So I do want to thank Virginia for that, and while we continue to work with banks in the area, and they've been very good to us here, it is a challenge to get to work with a bank. I don't think it really has anything to do whether you're Hispanic or non-Hispanic. It really has to do with the business you're in, and if you can substantiate them lending money to you.
And then working on both sides of the border, is that a challenge in itself?
In the 2007-08 time period, I would say yes. And you talk about challenges in business, which are many, cash being first and foremost for any business. But factors that are outside of your control. We had several situations happen to our company that have caused us to rethink what we're doing, and some suggestions for entrepreneurs. Obviously 2007-08 in this area, it was not a good area to be in or to be working across the border because of all the issues related to the drug wars and whatnot. So we were very cautious. We ended up moving our facility to an industrial park to be a little safer, if you will, for what safe was worth. Fortunately, we didn't have any issues back then, but it was certainly very challenging and made one think about, doing business down there. Fortunately, things are, still we always proceed with caution, but I think that was one of the challenges we had back in that 2, 3, 4 year time period. And since then, even then, I still tell my employees, please, be careful. There's no reason you be down there at night when it's dark. Places you don't need to be. You wouldn't do that in any big city, so don't do it here.
You go back and forth regular?
I used to go more. I have an operations manager who's excellent, Fernando Moreno, now that pretty much has taken over my role. And thanks to him doing that, allows me to do more CEO work and him do more of the operations work. And he's the one that goes over regularly. I go down there once a month, sometimes twice a month, to meet with Francisco, basically just to review financials.
If I was to ask you a question about your biggest challenge, is something come to mind right away?
Oh yeah. Biggest challenge, I was on the path to retirement back in 2003, and I received a phone call from, God rest his soul, a gentleman by the name of Max Frederick, who was a salesman for our then largest customer, and I'll mention their name because they were a great company, Harper Wyman. He says, we have a problem. I said, what problem do we have? And he said, the problem is that we can no longer make valves. And I said, well, what does that have to do with harnesses or switch harnesses that we make? He says, Gustavo, every valve, or 4 valves, 5 valves, takes 1 switch harness. This is what goes behind your stoves, goes in your RVs, goes anywhere you have gas ignition, there's valves. That's what opens up the gas, which allows it to be lit by the electronics or the modules that we make and the switch harnesses. And he said, we moved our process from up north to Tennessee and to Juarez, and the processes they had, the equipment, and this is something that I would have advised, and we've done this successfully, and not based on what happened to them. They actually were not able to get the equipment up and running that they were running up north. The problem was that that equipment was held together by chewing gum, by glue, and most importantly by individuals with 30, 35 years experience that knew how to run it. When they decided to move it to Tennessee, all they could see was cost reduction in terms of reducing personnel, and so they brought on new people, even with the help of customers, which is something I don't think a lot of people want to have, is have their customers come and help them. They couldn't get that business up and running. The storyline on this is that was informed to me in 2003 about November. April 12 of 2004, and I remember dates, they filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy because the vendors, and we were like number 20 on their top list of vendors, and they had many in the area here, and I'm sure many of them know them. They could not come to agreement on a plan to allow them to keep operating. 4 or 5 months later, after April, they filed Chapter 7. They shut everything down. The worst part about this is that they were 70% of our business, 70. Wow. So the moral of the story is, don't work with one customer.
Right.
We were fat, dumb, and happy because they would just keep adding part numbers to the portfolio that we were building them. You don't say no. The mistake was we weren't pursuing business elsewhere. We were only running with them. And continuing that story, which it kind of has a happy or a nice ending as we turn it around, the products that they were making then, and they literally put out of work 200 plus people down here that they had in the manufacturing facility, is that the engineer that was then working with them now works for me, and he does all our development work, and I mentioned his name, Franz Sippel, excellent individual. Actually, he's retired, but loving what he's doing with me. And we are continuing to develop products now for the same gas stove industry. So had that not happened, I would say this probably wouldn't be taking place right now. The other interesting thing as I learn about taxes and legal matters is that all of the payments that were made to us the 3 months prior to April 12 had to be returned. It's called preferential payments.
Oh, I didn't know. Oh, wow.
So that is ask any lawyer and they can talk to you about that. And believe me, and I had to hire an Illinois lawyer. This was an Illinois company. And we ended up settling. It wasn't a good deal. I don't know how we made it through, but we did. Here we are. And so that, to me, one of the greatest challenges ever. And my only advice is, if you have one customer, at least get another.
So you had to do some fast pedaling to recover.
Big time. We ended up, all of the Harper Wyman business was acquired by a company called Burner Systems, who took over all the good stuff, all the assets, but they didn't worry about any of the liability. So they took that, kept running with it. We eventually got them as a customer and then continued to work with them. And actually the best part about that situation was they decided to shut their Juarez operation down. And when they did that, Mr. Sipple contacted me and said, hey, would you like to bid on building all of the printed circuit board assemblies? And we did. The only caveat was that they told us this product is going to die. So you need to get us some new stuff, or you're going to be done making this in the next 4 or 5 years. And surprisingly enough, that product was so good that we're still making it, obviously not in the volumes they were making it then, but we continue to develop newer, better products which will replace these in the industry. And now we're working with some of the end customers that are actually stove manufacturers, working with them directly.
So really the entrepreneur is a recovery artist. Because you hit a lot of walls, huh?
A lot of walls. You need to know when to make a turn or think you need to make a turn. And there's no formula, there's no manual that tells you what to do, what not to do. And I honestly have to say that a lot of it's been on gut feeling, but you have to listen. You know, I've had a lot of family support, as I've said. My family has been behind me on this. The employees. Actually, another challenge was that we all faced 2008, 2009 with the economic disaster back then. We actually had furloughed employees, and they agreed to do it. And thanks to the fact that for 1 month we weren't able to pay them.
Wow.
And I thought, wow, what else do I do? And that's what we did, and they said no, we agreed to it. And fortunately, by that summer of 2009, what was then our largest customer all of a sudden began opening the floodgates, and we were making harnesses left and right for them after that, when that economic recovery started.
So you're an engineer, you got into manufacturing, but you're really operating as a mature entrepreneur.
I would say yes. I continue to dabble in different areas. What we're doing with M-Expo, which I think is going to be a very successful show. So successful that IPC, which is now, we're kind of joined at the hips with them, with the Wire Harness Manufacturer Association. They're coming down here in a couple weeks, and they want to invest in the area. I might add, and thank you for reminding me, that we did such a good job at the show last year, 2018 in Juarez, that the city of El Paso is on board now. And they actually went up to the Milwaukee show to support us in the trade show there, and to talk about the free trade zone, which is something that we are getting involved with and will have in our own properties. So I think we've made some people aware of what we're doing, and the city of El Paso is a great name to have behind us.
So after 30 years of business, right? You're still growing.
Still growing.
Fantastic. Well, Gustavo Farell, I really appreciate you sharing your story. I trust our viewers enjoyed and have learned much. And we thank the viewers for watching, and we appreciate you sharing your story. Have a good day. Thank you. Until next time.